Yuji slowly began to open his eyes, and as he opened his eyes, he saw the wreck of a destroyed city, countless impaled bodies that were impaled by Sukuna using Yuji's blood, and several collapsed buildings, all these people that were killed by Yuji, as several memories began to enter into Yuji. Because of the fact that it was Yuji's blood that was utilized to wipe out that many people, Yuji could almost feel it. He could feel every single time someone was wiped out by one of the blood arrows, every single person who had died by Yuji's own hand, and it was so many, thousands of deaths all around them. The only amount of relief that Yuji was allowed was the fact that he would know that he didn't kill anybody he cared about because he felt every single person who did die to the hands of his blood arrow. Time and everything around Yuji almost felt like it was moving slow, as Yuji was forced to have to process through every single memory that had happened, everything that had happened during Sukuna's battle against Mahito. All of the blood manipulation that he had used to effectively torture Mahito while at the same time killing every single civilian he could see with no remorse. All he could feel was that murderous glee, one that was toxic, one that was coursing through his body, and he absolutely hated this feeling. Of course, it was not his own, it was Sukuna's, but he hated being able to feel it by proxy, as the blood wings that Sukuna had formed on Yuji's body were still remaining even now. And Yuji was angry. He was angry at Sukuna for causing all of this death. He was angry at Mahito for being the one to reawaken Sukuna and cause all this death to happen, but most of all, he was angry at himself. There had to be something more he could have done, some way he could have won against Mahito. Maybe if he hunted him down before Shibuya and killed him, then none of this would have happened. Maybe if he never consumed Sukuna's fingers, Sukuna would have never gotten the chance to re-emerge. Maybe if he just waited for the other sorcerers and had all of them join alongside him, then Mahito would have died. Why did he think he could take Mahito on alone? Why did he try that? These questions kept riddling in Yuji's head. What could he have done that could have prevented this? What could he have done better? What could he have done in order to avoid the path that they were on today? As a rage and anger as well as self-hate began to steep inside of Yuji and steep deep inside of him. One that the King of Curses was reveling on right now. The king was intrigued to see how far Yuji's rage would end up pushing him, which is why he decided to give Yuji one final push, as he decided to interrupt his thoughts. Those questions of what could have been done, of what could have been done to avoid this, are now irrelevant, brat. Everyone here is dead. Dead because of that cursed spirit's actions, because he released me, and because I chose to kill those people. So stop blaming yourself, or at least stop blaming yourself right now. After all, while you were too late to save these people, you are not too late to avenge them. And the longer that you stand up here, the more and more you're going to make their lives that were lost go to nothing. Shut the hell up, Yuji would respond. A clear rage was eminent in the voice in his mind. As that caused Sukuna to go silent, however, internally he was laughing. He was laughing hysterically as he was enjoying this. He could see that he had done it. Even though Yuji wanted him to shut up, he could see that his words had hit for Yuji. And Yuji's self-guilt was put to the back of his mind for now. He still blamed himself. He still blamed himself for causing everything that happened, but right now that wasn't important. A total of 1 second had passed, 1 second since Yuji had woken back up. A confident smile was rising on Mahito. After all, he had beaten Yuji on his own and he had transformed since that point. He had gotten stronger since that point. Sure, Yuji had consumed 2 fingers and landed just as many black flashes, but he had not unlocked a new transformation like he did. He still had a pretty good chance to win this. However, when he looked back at Yuji, he looked a bit different. There was something different about the look in his eyes. Of course, Yuji always had a hate for Mahito. That was always present in his eyes, and Yuji always had a desire for revenge against Mahito for what he had done against Junpei, for all the people he had killed. But now the determination he had to kill Mahito before was like a river, in comparison to the ocean of determination that was present in Yuji now. As cursed energy began to flare off of his body and flare off of it rapidly. Cursed energy generated from the negative emotions towards Mahito, towards Sukuna, and most of all towards himself. Though Mahito still remained confident as he told Yuji, "You can generate as much cursed energy as you like, and you can hate me as much as you want. It is not going to change a single thing about this battle." But there was still one more thing that was slightly concerning to Mahito, beyond the fact that determination was present in Yuji, but also the fact that Yuji still had those blood wings that Sukuna was utilizing earlier. But most of all, the most intimidating thing to Mahito was the fact that when he said something, Yuji didn't even give him a response. As suddenly out from Yuji's back, a secondary pair of blood wings began to rise out, and this pair of blood wings was significantly bigger than the original 2 wings that Yuji had on his body. The wingspan of these new wings were twice the length of Yuji's height. before they then all flapped as they suddenly launched a massive barrage of blood arrows right towards Mahito's direction, and these were all of the blood arrows that Sukuna had launched into Shibuya. Launching all of them at once, using all of the blood for those bigger pairs of wings. He did still have the smaller pair of wings, but those bigger pair of wings were gone. Thankfully though, they weren't being launched by Sukuna, which made them not as fast, but Mahito still knew that this was not something he'd want to get hit by, considering the massive abundance of these blood arrows that were flying towards him. So Mahito began to move backwards, starting to repeatedly dodge each of the blood arrows until a few of them did pierce into his arm. However, while they did pierce into it, it wasn't that deep of a piercing. However, as he tried to look up to Yuji's direction, he could see that Yuji was no longer there, before he suddenly felt a hard impact land on his back. And while the punch was hard, it was still manageable, as both of the serpent heads turned around in order to begin firing flesh spears at Yuji. However, Yuji continued on his charge, as he focused blood around his hands, enhancing his blood armor even further to begin punching away at each of the spears coming at him before he caught one of them. And after he did catch one of them, he threw it high into the air with blood around it in order to keep it floating, as Mahito turned around and went for a punch on Yuji. Yuji was just narrowly able to lift up his arms in order to block the blow, but it did send him flying. Before Yuji then flapped his own blood wings, stopping his own momentum, as Yuji then opened up his hands, creating 2 slicing exorcism discs. Before he then threw the both of them right at Mahito's direction, and they were speeding at him quite fast as well. Mahito then jumped to the side in order to avoid both of the slicing exorcisms. However, as he moved to dodge it, he felt a burn against his side. While this burn wasn't anywhere near as potent as Sukuna's burn, it was still something he could feel, and he realized in that moment what this meant for sure. Yuji remembered everything that Sukuna had done in his body, which meant there was a pretty good chance that Yuji could just access all the techniques that Sukuna had used against Mahito in their fight. While it wouldn't be anywhere near as potent as when Sukuna utilized them, it would still be rather deadly and something in Yuji's arsenal for him to use, as he realized that Yuji was definitely going to be a different beast in comparison to what he had fought before. Furthermore, Yuji was also fully healed, his body was adjusted to Sukuna now, and finally, most of all, he was still feeling the effects of the 4 black flashes he had landed earlier. As now Mahito was planning to go in for close quarters in a rush on Yuji, as he began to chant, "Body, will, so," and suddenly, the serpents were interrupted, as both of the slicing exorcisms turned around and sliced at the serpents on the back, causing their chants to be interrupted and for them to be damaged. Not completely torn off, but damaged, as Mahito also felt a pain on his back from both of the blood discs hurting his body. As Mahito then realized exactly what Yuji was targeting, he was going for the serpents on Mahito's back. After all, if those could be removed, then Mahito would be significantly easier to handle. As Yuji then lifted up both of his hands, creating several blood strings in order to begin launching them towards Mahito. At the same time though, this was made to be a distraction, so the slicing exorcisms that he launched before could turn back into normal blood. As the blood began to slowly sneak its way into the serpent mouths for now, while at the same time the blood strings were being launched at Mahito, he was going to have to dodge each of them rather carefully. After all, this was much more precise in comparison to the discs. But he was pulling it off just narrowly. It was rather hard for him to avoid, but he was doing it, as Yuji then decided now was the time to swap tactics as he flew high up into the air while continuing to send the strings down at him. Mahito was just narrowly dodging right now, but he was starting to figure out its movements and get more and more adjusted to the blood strings. However, as he looked up to Yuji, he would see one of the flesh spears that he had launched out fly back towards Yuji. But at the same time, Yuji had clapped his hands together, preparing to fire off a piercing blood, as he used piercing blood in order to propel the flesh spear at Mahito at an insanely fast speed. Mahito was just barely able to lift up his hands in order to prepare to block it, while at the same time he had his serpents prepared to chant, as they said, "Body, whip." But then, the blood that Yuji had snuck into the serpents had suddenly exploded, as Yuji used Supernova on the flesh serpents. And while it did not destroy the flesh serpents, it did end up destroying the organs inside of it that would allow it to speak, as now Mahito was no longer able to use the flesh serpents to chant, as the flesh spear propelled by the piercing blood went through both of Mahito's arms and pushed him back heavily. If Mahito had not lifted up his arms, that would have gone right through his chest. As Mahito looked up to see the glowing yellow eyes that were staring down on him, staring down with a massive amount of bloodlust for him, and Mahito could now truly see the message his eyes were telling, which was it didn't matter what Mahito would do, Yuji would kill him. And those eyes sent a chill down Mahito's spine. Now Sukuna had a large amount of bloodlust, a near unrivaled and unparalleled amount of bloodlust, but Sukuna's was for everyone. It wasn't focused. It wasn't focused on a singular target, but this was focused on Mahito and ending his life. However, Mahito forcefully snapped himself out of this bone-chilling feeling, as he began to jump up high at Yuji, almost in his attempt of defiance, trying to defy that very fear that Yuji was putting into him right now. as both of the serpent heads opened wide, and Mahito put even more curse energy into it than usual to rapid-fire flesh spears towards him, and powerful ones at that. Yuji met this charge head-on by spinning around each of the flesh spears and catching 2 of them, before throwing them back at Mahito. Mahito was able to release enough flesh spears in order to counter those that were coming at him, as the 2 of them then clashed fists with each other. The 2's fists pushing against each other, and Mahito was able to notice that his fist was only slightly more powerful than Yuji. The 2 of them were rather close right now, but Mahito still had an advantage in physical strength. As the 2 of them began to rapidly exchange blows, Mahito attempting to take this chance to go on the close-range offense, with Yuji being able to deflect each of the blows. However, Yuji was currently still the defending party. However, suddenly during one of the times the 2 of them clashed fists, blood rose up off of Yuji's fist around Mahito's arm, before it began to compress and then expand, exploding and using the supernova on Mahito's fist. And while the damage was minor, this did end up surprising Mahito nonetheless, but this little moment of opening was exactly what Yuji needed, as Yuji then created 2 supernovas behind his own back in order to propel him forward so he could land a punch on Mahito's chest. This was followed by another punch and another. He was rapid firing these punches, sending Mahito back further and further, but he didn't let Mahito get any distance as he continued to catch up to him. And as both of the serpent heads prepared to aim at Yuji, Yuji then clapped his hands together and used piercing blood right on Mahito's chest, sending him flying into the ground and making a crater. As Mahito then looked up to see several slicing exorcism discs coming towards him, each of them wielding the same heat property from before, so Mahito very quickly pushed himself out from the crater and began to start dodging each of them, but he also knew that Yuji was able to control them from a range, which meant he would have to constantly be on his toes and make sure he could continue to dodge them. And while Mahito was succeeding in dodging them, he wasn't dodging them far enough. They were still landing several burns on his body, damaging the absolute form further and further. Mahito also knew that he would not be able to repair the absolute form. Normally he would be able to if he could get other humans around him, but Sukuna had eliminated everybody in Shibuya that was close enough for him to add to his absolute form. However, suddenly Yuji landed right in front of him with a large amount of curse energy focused towards his fist, but at the same time Mahito was able to hear that heartbeat echo all throughout Shibuya, that familiar heartbeat of the flowing red scale burst. As now Mahito was 100% focused on this. After all, this was by far and away the most dangerous move in Yuji's arsenal. He knew that he had to deal with this, and now, he couldn't let that hit him. As Mahito then focused curse energy towards his own fist, preparing to clash with Yuji once again. However, suddenly, Mahito's focus was completely interrupted, as all 4 of the slicing exorcisms that Yuji had launched out from before sliced right through the serpents, destroying them and cutting them off of Mahito's body. And this caused Mahito to enter into a large amount of pain. After all, that was his true soul. That was the true form of his soul that was now just cut off. Now, if Mahito had time to regenerate it, he would have, but he did not have time right now, as his focus was then brought back to Yuji, who landed a flowing red-scaled burst on Mahito. But this wasn't just an ordinary one either. This was also a black flash. This attack had sent Mahito flying, completely destroying his absolute form and killing it. And now he was left in his true form. He was also now left without his serpent heads, leaving 2 exposed points to his true form on his back. As Mahito then raised his guard, preparing all 4 of his arms. While he knew he didn't stand that much of a chance now, especially considering his absolute form was destroyed, he wasn't going to give up that easy. But before the 2 could continue their battle, Yuji had something he wanted to say to Mahito. He had something that he wanted to say to his face, which was why he was waiting until he tore off the absolute form. I wonder if you were part human like me, would you have ended up being the same way? Would you have had actual value for life? Though asking questions like that is irrelevant. After all, something like that will never happen. But I do want to tell you what will happen. No matter what form you take, no matter how you reincarnate, no matter what cursed spirit you become again, I will kill you over and over and over again till the end of time. And because I am a part curse, that means I will live till the end of time. Yuji was not a human, but he was also not a curse. He was both, but at the same time neither. And because of that, he could transcend human limits. He would be able to make sure that Mahito would continue to die over and over and over again with every life that he had reincarnated into. Now, in truth, Yuji wasn't sure if he was going to live forever or if he was just going to have an extended lifespan. After all, Choso and his brothers did have an extended lifespan, but he wasn't sure if they were immortal to age or not. But what he was certain about was that he would make sure that Mahito would continue to die over and over again. The only cursed spirit that he truly despised was Mahito. After all, the other cursed spirits that he had seen, like Jogo and Hanami, were able to form value for other cursed spirits. But Mahito would never have value for other cursed spirits. All he would care about is himself, and he would be willing to end any life so long as it was for his own entertainment, and that was something that Yuji absolutely despised. And Mahito hearing that declaration angered him. He absolutely despised how confident that Yuji was being. Mahito had trained for so long in order to achieve a level where he could beat Yuji, where he could finally kill him once and for all. There was no way he was going to accept defeat here, as he lifted up all 4 of his arms and prepared for combat. Yuji's blood wings then changed shape, changing into a ring that was floating behind Yuji's back. However, this was when Mahito casted a binding vow, as he said no more cheap tricks, and the 2 extra arms that he had made for his true form faded away, in order to give his true form an even better buff. While he would no longer be able to constantly make hand signs, he was going to make sure it was more than worth it. He wanted to beat Yuji his own way. As the 2 opponents immediately rushed at each other, starting out with the both of them clashing fists against each other, resulting in the ground underneath them breaking. As the 2's fists began to move back, with Mahito attempting to land a punch on Yuji's face. However, Yuji ducked underneath that punch, and when he rose up, he landed an uppercut on Mahito's chin. And as Mahito attempted to use both of his arms to grab onto Yuji, Yuji landed a punch on his chest as well as a punch on his stomach with both of his fists, sending Mahito flying backwards. As Yuji then continued on his barrage, now attempting to go for a knee on Mahito's face, but Mahito was able to catch it and use his tail to smack Yuji away. However, while Yuji was sent flying, he lifted up his hands, revealing several blood threads that were connected to Mahito's tail in order to pull Mahito into a hard punch in the face. And while Mahito was stunned by this attack, Yuji decided that he was going to deal with that tail right here and now, as he opened up both of his hands, creating 2 more slicing exorcisms and throwing them down at Mahito's tail to begin cutting away at Mahito's tail. And this caused quite a bit of pain to echo throughout Mahito's body. His tail would have been sliced off in a normal circumstance if it wasn't for the binding vow that he had just made. However, cracks were starting to appear on his armor. Furthermore, with each of the punches that Yuji had landed up to this point, cracks were appearing on Mahito as well, as Mahito forcefully snapped himself out of this pain and went for a punch on Yuji's face. At the same time, Yuji also went for a punch on Mahito's own, resulting in both Yuji and Mahito taking a punch to the face, as they were both sent flying away from each other, and even more cracks were starting to form on Mahito's armor, as Yuji then spat out some blood from the blow. As 2 very small blood orbs began to form behind Yuji's feet. 2 small blood orbs that immediately compressed, being the supernova, as Yuji then jumped forward using the supernova in order to launch himself forward at an even faster speed. As Yuji landed in front of Mahito and immediately landed a punch on Mahito's chest. When Mahito attempted to grab him with his other hands though, out from the blood ring on Yuji's back, both of the blood wings ended up rising out once more, smacking Mahito's hands away, allowing Yuji to land another punch on Mahito's face, which is followed by another hard punch on Mahito's chest, and finally a punch to Mahito's stomach. As Mahito attempted to jump away, but Yuji did not let him get away, as he went forward, blocking one of Mahito's punches that he attempted to land on him, while at the same time landing another punch in the same spot on the chest. With each punch, Yuji was tearing away at Mahito's true form slowly and surely, and now Mahito had no way to regenerate it either. As curse energy began to flare up around Yuji's arms, Mahito could tell that Yuji was going for another black flash. He could feel it, he could sense it, and he didn't know when he was planning to land it. As Mahito felt that he needed to end Yuji right here and now, he needed to find a way to win. If Yuji landed another black flash, it would be over for him. As Yuji went on the offense, landing a barrage of punches on Mahito's arms, as Mahito was able to block each of them. However, with each punch that Yuji landed, he was slowly and surely cracking away at that armor. As Mahito then attempted to use his tail in order to grab Yuji, but that was when Yuji's blood wings flapped, giving him some momentum in order to jump over it as well as Mahito. As Yuji mid-air created another slicing exorcism and used it to cut off Mahito's tail, removing that limb completely. Now Mahito was a cursed spirit, so regenerating a lost limb like that would have been easy. However, it would have taken a large amount of curse energy. Not as much as recovering those 2 serpent heads, but it would have taken a large amount nonetheless. And right now against someone like Yuji, he couldn't risk losing that amount of curse energy. As Yuji then landed behind Mahito, focusing a great amount of curse energy towards his fist. This curse energy was so focused and so potent. It was rather deadly, and Mahito knew this was something he couldn't let him hit him. He was going to need to block it or at least land his own hit first. However, as the 2's fists began to rush at each other, suddenly Mahito felt tens of blows land across both of his arms. Each time that Yuji had punched his arm, he had used the divergent fist in order to delay the curse energy that was landing on Mahito, which allowed Mahito to be open as Yuji focused the curse energy towards his fist and punched Mahito straight in the chest, landing a black flash on Mahito and completely shattering his armor, as well as wearing Mahito out completely of curse energy. As Mahito was now on his knees, forced to look up to the opponent in front of him, he tried to use the very last of his curse energy to change the shape of his arm into a blade and try and stab Yuji, but that was a bad idea, as suddenly blood threads surrounded Mahito's arm and cut it clean off. And when Mahito looked up to Yuji, it was almost like he could see hundreds of souls behind him, all of the faces that he had turned into transfigured humans, everybody that he had killed. all the people that he had turned into his own puppets, his own weapons in an attempt to kill this man, as it ultimately amounted to nothing. No, it amounted to worse than nothing. After all, Mahito had created this. Mahito had spawned this desire to get stronger in Yuji. If Mahito never fought Yuji back then, if Mahito had never done anything to Junpei, then Yuji would not have any motivation, or at least anywhere near as much motivation to kill him. Then Mahito would have been able to kill him later. Hell, if Mahito had just killed Yuji when he had the chance, when he had defeated him, then he would not be in this situation. What was he thinking? Why did he do this to himself? He felt so helpless, as there wasn't a single thing that he could do. He had no transfigured humans left that he could use. He had no abilities left. He was out of curse energy completely. He was going to die. His arm was torn off. As suddenly a kick landed on Mahito's chest from Yuji, as he was sent into the ground. Before Mahito was then picked up by his hair and punched in the gut. As Yuji began to land a barrage of punches on Mahito's gut. While it was hurting him, he was making sure that Mahito was able to stay alive through all of these punches. As each of the punches that he had just landed on Mahito was a punch for every soul that Mahito had taken in Shibuya, for every soul that Sukuna had killed in his body. And once he was done, he put his foot on Mahito's chest, beginning to step down on him in order to crush him slowly. But suddenly Yuji felt a hand on his shoulder. As he looked over to see his brother, he saw Choso, with Nobara and Todo a bit more in the background and on guard, as Choso then told Yuji that he needed to stop, that torturing Mahito wasn't going to help him. He understood that Mahito had done several bad things. He had killed so many people and caused Yuji so much pain, but giving in to it and torturing him wasn't going to help him. It was just going to make him feel more empty in the end. He knew Yuji had went through a lot. He was forced to grow up thanks to all the circumstances around him, despite still being only 15 years old. But as Choso was his older brother, it wasn't just his role to protect him from physical threats, but also to protect him from himself, and that was what he was doing right now. He was trying to make sure that Yuji wouldn't give in to a desire for revenge, that Yuji wouldn't be completely consumed by it, and thanks to hearing those words from Choso, it did help him. Now Yuji still was going to kill Mahito, and Choso wasn't telling him to stop doing that, he was simply just telling him that torturing him wasn't the way. As Yuji then prepared to fire a piercing blood, clapping his hands together, this was going to be the final move, the final thing that was going to kill Mahito once and for all. However, they were all interrupted, as suddenly a wave of lava bullets were fired down towards them, resulting in Yuji having to lose focus and both Yuji and Choso moving away, but this confused the both of them. After all, Chogo was dead. However, as they all looked back to Mahito, they saw someone else beginning to approach him, Suguru Geto. That was Kamo Noritoshi, the parent of both Yuji as well as Choso, as he used cursed spirit manipulation in order to absorb Mahito and consume him, while at the same time Jogo landed right next to Kenjaku, as the two of them were preparing to face off against their four opponents.